the blind players have a.
How's that?
Go with that. Keep on maybe half a mile on your left. Across from the Cuckoos.
You're going to take the lights down a tad.
Millstone in the front wall.
Oh, yeah.
That'll help. I have to kind of strike a middle ground. The center is clear. Just start.
Let me introduce you. Welcome, all of you here today to Richard Townsend's presentation on Minnie May Monks, author of Winbeam. And I'm Richard Mariconda, director of the library, and I'm glad you could all make it. We have some refreshments afterwards, and I'll turn the show over to Richard.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I think we're going to have a few people straggling in. I have a number of people who told me they're going to be here today, and all of them had a little time pressures to make it by 1. So we will have a few interruptions, but I want to get started because we have a lot of material to cover in a very short period of time. And I think in the way of introduction to myself, the only thing you really need to know is that I absolutely love the works of Minnie May Monks, and I've spent the last 10 years researching and recording as much as I could find out about her and her family and the area that she loves so much. And so I want to share that with you, and I hope you enjoy the time we have together. It's going to be a little bit fast. I want to try to spend about a minute a slide. I think that'll be a real challenge. It normally takes about an hour to get through all this. If you have questions, don't hesitate to ask. First of all, I want to thank Richard and the staff here at the library for hosting our day today. And I have a few other people I want to especially thank. I want to thank Mabel Monks in the back for giving me permission to reproduce some of these materials. And to Alan and Helen Mitnick, who aren't here yet, but they're expected to be here today, who loaned me some of the original manuscripts. And to Paul and Marie Bryan, who provided a number of photographs for me of the Vernon Royal collection. And of course to my mom and dad, who gave me my first copy of Winbeam quite a few years ago. And they've loaned me a lot of family photos, which you'll see here today. This picture here is of Long Pond. And I included it in the picture, one, because it's a Vernon Royal photograph, and you're going to see a lot of his in Minnie May Monks' books, and also because it marks the northern boundary of the region that is described surrounding Midvale. Midvale was halfway between Long Pond and Pumpton Lakes along the line of the railroad. And so, to me, I thought it was appropriate to include that northern border. This is taken in the late 1800s and shows the area before it was developed. Beautiful scene. This slide is of, photograph on this slide, is of Pumpton Lakes. This is one of the earliest of the Royal Collection photographs that I have. And this is taken from the Schuyler Bridge, which crosses the river between the Colfax Avenue section and Terhune Drive. And that is one of the earliest of the photographs, and you'll see a difference in the quality of the photographs. As we move through these, I'll try to point that out to you. With the camera equipment that he used at that time, when he zoomed in on an area, the area that was near the center appears kind of as a round circle. And then everything to the left and right of it fades. And then how he cropped the picture changed the way it appears on the page. So I thought this was a great shot, and that marks the southern boundary of the Midvale region. We're going to look at the book itself, a little bit about Minnie, her ancestral lines, so that those of you who are interested in her ancestry should have a lot of detail to walk away with. If there's anything that you want more information on, make note of it, and if you can, make note of the slide that it's on there just by title or page number, and I'll get back to you with some more information if I have any. For most of these, I've got quite a bit more to add. We're going to look at some old maps, old and new maps of the region, so you can see a comparison of the sites she was referring to and how those look today. and Minnie's map, her own map that she drew, which was a real find for me. I was thrilled to get that. And then, of course, all the photographs that are interdispersed throughout the presentation. So that's what's on our agenda. The area in Midvale that we're going to be focusing on was called Freedomdale, and it surrounds the Freedom Furnace, which was Ryerson's furnace along the Wanaque River. And that furnace was called Ryerson's Furnace or Freedom Furnace, and the area was called Freedomdale, now called Midvale. One of my interests in Minnie May Monks' work has been my family tree. So if you have interest in genealogy and you want to research families like those you see on this list, Rhinesmiths, Tice, Van Orden, Marion, Hyler, Bailey, DeGraw, Vreeland, Buckby, I mean, they're all the old names. Fortunately for me, having grown up in this area, my father in this area all of his life, and his father before him, and so on, back 7 generations, it's very easy to record our family history, as opposed to some people who really have to work very hard to get it. So Minnie's book was a valuable resource to me in terms of these old family lines, and if you're interested in that, you might find the same interest in the book. If anyone is interested in seeing this, I can pass around a hard copy if you're interested. But just please make sure I get that back. As I mentioned to you, one of Minnie's interests was the ironworks, and it was the same for me. Our family came down from Southfields. This is a Vernon Royal photograph on the left showing the plaque that was put up by the Daughters of the American Revolution at Sterling, which at that time was part of Bergen County, just today across the New York state line. And I've been, tracking down as much information as I could get on the old ironworks and our family connection to them. On the right is a photograph I took 80 years later, and I still think Vernon Royal had me beat. The photographs that he took are just absolutely incredible. The presentation, because it's so bright, really doesn't do them justice. But if you want to look at these slides closer when we're finished, you're welcome to. Part of the interest in the ironworks around Sterling reveals some interesting things that Minnie was aware of. She had an awareness of things that were passing. She wrote Winbeam because the valley was passing out of existence. She wrote about the Wanaque Indians that were passing out of existence. She had a very interesting sense of recording history, and I'm very pleased that she did it. In this slide, on the third person from the left side, on the front slide, which is a Vernon Royal print, these are the Sterling Furnace number 2. Again, that was part of the Townsend family industry. That is Thomas Edison standing there. And you might wonder, why would Thomas Edison have been looking at the ruins of the old Sterling ironworks? A lot of people don't know it, but Thomas Edison invested in an ironworks along the Milton area on what we call Sparta Glen Road, and he actually went bankrupt in the middle of his life. He invested in a process of extracting ore, and he was researching it at the time that he was here, and he actually went under. And he went back to an interesting sidelight as he went back to his, I guess you call it workshop, and took off the shelf a device that he called his master time waster. He felt it was a device that had absolutely no socially redeeming value, and as it turns out, that was the Nickelodeon. And he started an entirely new industry with film and television to follow. So I thought it was interesting for me as a kid to see Thomas Edison standing there. Yes?
Is there a date to that photo or approximate date?
Yeah, 1929, thereabouts for the one on the lower left, and 1925 for the one on the upper right. And these are 2 different furnaces that were at Sterling. The first furnace has been restored and still standing in Sterling Forest on the old road that ran from Ringwood to the woodlands in where the old Sterling Forest Gardens were. I think that's called Long Meadow Road. But the original furnace is standing there. That's where the chain was made to cross the Hudson River to stop the British ships. So that, for me as a kid, was really fascinating stuff. Just recently, I took a look at one of the other ironworks that was in that area. This is the Townsend Furnace in Southfields, just a little bit further north in the southern portion of Orange County. And the photo on the left is a 1925 Vernon Royal print. The photo on the right is a April 1st, April Fool's print that I took just about a week ago. And you can see that they're reconstructing that furnace. The furnace that was on Furnace Avenue in Midvale went down to build the Wanaque Reservoir. In fact, the stones from that furnace are in the riprap on the back end of the dam. And Minnie was aware of the fact that that furnace was going down. She had a real fascination for these. And her first chapter, the first photograph inside the book, in the text of the book, is of that furnace. So I thought it was appropriate to include these for the Vernon Royal aspect of the book, and to tell you why I'm interested, what got me started. And so if you have interest in the ironworks, you'll find interesting little tidbits all through the book about local farmers and local entrepreneurs who had their own ironworks on their own properties. It's very interesting. Her grandfather being one of them. In terms of things that are passing, the Clinton furnace, this is another Vernon Royal print. This furnace was in great shape 30 years ago when I saw it for the first time. And I read a sad commentary in the North Jersey Highlands Historical Magazine that the right side has collapsed. So that's one more furnace that's in jeopardy. The center core of the furnace had collapsed about 10 years ago, and it's just not being restored yet that I can tell. But I include this for another reason. This area here surrounding this furnace is the Split Rock Reservoir area. Clinton Reservoir area. It's just below the Clinton Falls. And I recently reprinted a document written by a descendant of the Kimball family, and she describes the taking of that valley as a blessing. She felt that it was she and her family were thrilled that they were going to take that property and develop that reservoir because it meant jobs, money, and opportunities for people to get out of that area and buy homes in other areas of Newfoundland. Okay? The whole Paradise Valley section was all gone. That is in such stark contrast to the way people felt about Wanaque that it's unbelievable to me. And you'll see that all through Minnie's works. Minnie May Monks was devastated at the loss of the Wanaque Valley, as are almost anyone who has family that remembers it. The last one of this series I wanted to show you is Long Pond. This is these two photographs I've never seen published anywhere else. The previous ones are all in Ransom's book, Vanishing Ironworks of the Ramapo's, but this one were two very nice pictures that I was able to pick up and show slightly different views of Long Pond. One of the other prints that somebody here may be able to help me with is one that I came across. Shows an ironworks that's supposedly in the North Jersey Highlands. That is a working blast furnace. You can see the collier's ramp going to the top of it, smoke billowing out of it. That one was in operation. I have no idea when the photograph was taken, but it's a great shot if you want to look at how these furnaces were laid out and what they were like. And again, these will be here for you to peruse when we're finished, but no one can tell me where this is. Some speculated that it was Booton, but the lay of the land isn't correct. The river's on the wrong side. The first time I mentioned that, I said the mountain was on the wrong side, and it was speculated that perhaps the picture was a negative, but if you switch it that way, then the river's on the wrong side, so you can't win with this.
Could that be up by Waterloo Village?
I'm not sure. I don't know where it is, and I'm hoping to find somebody who can tell me, but it's a great shot. Anybody who's interested in them would appreciate the details of that
I'm
picture.
sorry, have you checked the book, it was just published a couple of years ago, of the Ringwood area?
Yes,
It's not in
Lou
that
West's
one?
book, not there. It's not in early forges and furnaces. I mean, I've got a pretty good library, and I can't find this thing anywhere.
It couldn't be the Morris Canal up there?
The Morris Canal was a possibility. The Morris Canal never actually drove one of these furnaces. These furnaces required fast-moving water, and the canal was a placid waterway. But a sluice could have been driven off the canal to make it possible. But the water rights, by the time the canal was built, you have to remember that the canal was built very late. By the time that was happening, people were protecting their water rights and probably would not have let someone draw off the canal. So we've kind of rounded that one too. But there are no takers here, eh? All right.
Possible on the Ramapo somewhere?
I'm not sure. We'll find it eventually. This I included because Minnie May Monks had a fantastic attention to the Lenape Indians and all the interesting details that followed them, and she wrote about them in one of her books called At the End of the Trail, about life of one of her ancestors, a very early settler among the Wanaque Indians. Great little piece of work.
Did she draw that, Rich?
No, this I found by an anonymous artist in a book called Our State Papers. But I just thought it was great. It reflects some of Minnie's interests and mine. Love that little piece. This is a trail map, and I've had this map since I was a little kid. Dad had a copy of it. And, I saw it a few times, and then finally I got it myself. This is one of the first places where I ever saw Minnie May Monks mentioned, and it's a neat map. I like the Indians around the outside, and all the references to the Indian place names. As a kid, I lived right on the border of one of these trails. Pardon me for just 1 second. This will probably help. I grew up right down here, right down in this lower end, and we used to walk up through Wanaque High Point to the top of the mountains. That's just slightly south of Winbeam Mountain, where Minnie May Monks is concentrating. She writes about this area right in here. You'll see a better shot of that on another map. But what I liked about this is all the Indian place names that are mentioned here. Mockman being wild potato, Wanaque being sassafras. Many of you know these. But the reference to Minnie is right here in the top corner of that map, and that fascinated me. I always wanted to learn more about her and her writings. The map was used extensively by the White Ecology Center when it was the Nature's Friend Camp. In fact, they're referenced in here as well. The map has directions as to how to get to the center by train. Yes.
Rich, my grandmother saw the last Indian taken out of here. It was up by Nature's Friends, over in the back there, and it was like there's stone.
I know somebody who would love to talk to you.
But when she saw it, see, she was on the Stevens side, in Abram Stevens,
Right.
up there.
Right.
Well, you know, they walked there all the time and everything like that, and they came in there. She said it wasn't a real uniform. It was the shirt or the pants matched, but he was scared to death. They had like
They took him
stone.
out.
Yes,
Now that Ed Lennox.
I told him.
Okay. He just approached me and asked me if I knew anything about that. And all I know was that my great-grandfather, Albert, had property right next to the Cisco property where that hut was built. But we didn't know anything about that story. So let's talk to you. That's good. That's good. I included these because, again, these reflect a sentiment that was common to Minnie, and I think probably common to most of us kids. These are a pair of Revolutionary War handcuffs that we found along the Blue Dot Trail on that map. And I've had those authenticated. Those are all cast iron. They're incredible handcuffs. This is an Indian arrowhead also found on the Blue Dot Trail. And so as a kid, I mean, if you're a young person, Minnie May Monks' book is just full of lore that I think any kid is interested in. It's great stuff.
If anyone's interested in the Indian artifacts, my grandfather, who was Franklin Thorne, who had a homestead up there, he donated to the museum in Patterson an entire collection of arrowheads and lance heads and axe heads that he found up
All
in that
along that
area,
river,
and
sure.
they're down in the museum in Patterson.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. The trails as a kid fascinated me. To be on an Indian trail, I mean, those trails were blazed every summer with the blue dot was a white circle up with a round blue dot in the center of it. And we'd follow those from tree to tree, find our way through the woods. To me, that was just absolutely fascinating. The idea that the Indians had walked those trails just fascinated me no end. And so recently I discovered this coin, which is the end of the Oregon Trail. And it shows an Indian with his hand facing which way? East, with his hand up saying stop. And it shows on the obverse side, it shows the wagon wheel heading into the what? Heading into the setting sun in the western sky. and it's the clash between the white man and the Indian. I thought that was an incredible sentiment. What people don't realize is that in 1682, I believe it was, there were still 2,000 Lenape Indians in the state of New Jersey, and they were dying at a rate of 2 Indians for every white man who hit the shores. That's an amazing statistic. So if you figure it out, the population boom that followed in the 20, 30 years that followed, they were just wiped out. So if you have an interest in the Indians, you'll like Minnie's works. This is one of the first photographs or prints I remember seeing in my home, my grandparents' home when I was a kid. This one on the left is called The End of the Trail, and I was interested in that statue because it was my grandfather's house, but also because Minnie wrote a book called At the End of the Trail. This is the cover of her book over here on the right, and just a little story about the Indian. I had a student at the college who came in one time and was telling me all of his woes, all kinds of problems, every excuse under the sun for why he hadn't been in class, hadn't done his homework, just problems galore, all of which could be solved with very small financial assistance, and I wasn't taking it. And when we got to the end of the discussion, he sat there after repeating himself several times and he was kind of just worn out and looked around the room trying to figure out some other thing to tell me, and he glanced at the picture and he says, sometimes I feel just like that Indian. I said, yeah, I feel just like the horse. Love that picture. So all of that is by way of introduction to kind of the psyche of Minnie May Monks and mine, and why I found her so interesting. And with that, we'll start a look at her book first. This is the cover of Winbeam. It was published by the Knickerbocker Press in 1930 in New York City. And Carlton Beck, Henry Carlton Beck, you may know him, author of I'm running a blank on the name of the book you wrote.
Forgotten Towns,
Thank
North,
you.
South.
Yes, he wrote a whole series of books about forgotten towns, and he picked up on Minnie because he wrote all about the Wanaque area. And he says, I'll begin without delay to tell you the story of Winbeam, the mountain, the book, and the bright-eyed, delightful little lady, now 83 years old. He'd interviewed her quite extensively, and she was, from all accounts, a very interesting little lady. So that's what Winbeam looks like. If you're lucky enough to have one, hang on to it. They are getting harder and harder to find all the time. Minnie started writing, yes?
I'm sorry, that cover picture, where would that be today?
It's right where it was then.
Is what?
I'm just teasing.
Oh, okay.
It is as you come down Westbrook Road, and you pass the Miller's Falls on your left,
Yes.
Snake Inn on your right. It is from that viewpoint across the valley to Winbeam Mountain.
Okay.
And the road, the picture is called the Bend in the Road. You're going to see a couple more of those before we're finished today. The Bend in the Road was eliminated when the reservoir was built. Now it's a straight line.
And when you're going,
You're heading south out of West Milford on Westbrook Road, facing Winbeam Mountain.
and if you look down here to the right, sometimes before you make the bend onto Westbrook, you see a little old bridge.
That's the Stonetown Bridge. That is the Stonetown Bridge. And you'll see another photograph of that a little bit later too. Yes, any reference points that you want to ask questions about, please don't hesitate to ask. I'd love to point those things out because Minnie's works are described as folklore. Okay, what does folklore mean to you? Can't be verified, old stories, maybe true, maybe not true. I find that everything that woman wrote, you can find. You put yourself on the trail, you walk those trails, you'll find the places she talked about. There's no myths in here. It's all real. And I've done that. I had never seen a charcoal bottom. The lower area of a charcoal pit where the charcoal burners would make the charcoal. She describes them, and a number of people have described them to me as these big round circles, usually moss covered. And when you step on them, they're very soft, and once you hit them, you know you're on them. That's what Minnie says about them. She also describes a particular hike she took, and along the hike, she went down these ridges, and went down this little bank, and when she stepped onto the ledge floor, she felt the soft, spongy area, and she looked around, and sure enough, there was the outline circle of a charcoal pit. I found that exact location by following her detailed description in that book. That and a number of other things. You'll see them all as we go through this. So as early as 1879, there were rumors about the Wanaque Reservoir coming that early because the Newark watershed had not produced enough water, and the Wanaque River was considered one alternative and the Wanaque was another, and that started to mark the days for that entire area. And so she started writing just as the contracts were signed in 1922, which is really the official start of the project, and she finished in 1930 when the reservoir was completed. And she writes essentially about 6 summers as a child and then 2 chapters about her adult life, her interest as an adult life. The Wanaque home, which is the last chapter of the book, and Winbeam, which is about the area that's going to survive the flood. So she likes those last 2 chapters the best, and she refers to her grandparents through this. It's an interesting thing. Nowhere in the book does she mention the names of her mother and father, but she mentions Grandpa Pellington and Grandpa Monks. So it's a little work to figure out who's who there in that family line, but we got it. I'll show it to you in a moment. This is that turn that was on the front of the book, but I want you to notice something. That photograph shows the fields over here, and what do you see in the fields? Those are called furrows from where the field had been plowed, right? And look at the sky. You can't tell it with our lighting here today. It's a very bright photograph, but if you saw this in natural light, it has a yellowish, hazy cast to the sky. It's not the same photograph that appeared on the front of the book, which shows corn growing in the fields, okay, in a brighter day. And Vernon Royal had gone back there a couple times to take those shots. He visited that valley many times. I think he loved it as much as she did. You're going to see some more of his shots as we go through this. So in a nutshell, if you like the ironworks, if you like genealogy, American Indians, Dutch customs, folklore, hiking, you know, if you just like photography and the Wanaque area, you're going to love Winbeam. Just a brief look at the chapters that are in the text. These are the 14 chapters. All of them contain a original Vernon Royal print, except chapter 3, which has a silk screen shot of the old Lover's Bridge, or the iron bridge that crossed the Wanaque Reservoir. My parents didn't know it at the time, but in doing the research, I discovered that my mother's family lived on the left side of Lover's Bridge, and my father's family lived on the right side of Lover's Bridge. 4 generations later, they were joined. Surprisingly enough, they are cousins, but we won't talk about that. Distant cousins. They didn't know it. Explains a lot, though. Here's another shot of the bend in the road, and now the corn is fully, you know, past its prime, actually. And that is from a little hillside where we believe Minnie's cabin actually set. You're going to hear how she actually had the cabin moved.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm just fascinated.
Yeah. Struck a chord over there. Okay, so you're going to see that little bend in the road a few times. This is Little Winbeam, by the way, and this is Big Winbeam. And now I want to talk a bit about this map. If you're here, you're on the junction of Furnace Avenue and Ringwood Avenue. And as you go in Furnace Avenue today, you run right into the number 2 dam. That area right there, if you notice that sign, that's called Freedomdale. And you notice that lake that sits right there. That lake existed in 1861 when this map was made, and shortly thereafter when Vernon Royal took some pictures of the area. And that is the Wanaque River coming downstream from Boardville. Okay? And this little section right here, I'm going to try to outline it. That little road, that is Stonetown Bridge right there that you asked about a moment ago. That's where the bridge crossed the river. Stonetown Road went up to McGee Road. You went to McGee Road past the old Indian pothole, which is threatened by a road right now. And you come down across the old Sawmill Brook on McGee Road back to Westbrook Road. And then this road that goes off here is Snake Den. And right there on that little knoll where S.S. Townsend, that's Samuel Townsend's property, right between that and Snake Den is where we believe the house set, from all indications reading the deeds. Now, that map was 1861. Notice that that lake is a considerable size. Oh, by the way, here's Torrey Rocks up here. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. And I mentioned Snake Den. Here's the Ryerson Farm. We're going to talk about that. You'll see photographs of that later. Okay. Over here is the Tice. Right in here. That's Joseph Beam's home. You're going to see a picture of that, and the Tice home is set there as well. So we're going to be viewing that area a few more
Can I
times.
ask you a question before you change?
Yes.
Looking in the direction of Little Winbeam and Winbeam Mountain.
That's right here.
Are we looking, what
You're looking
opposite
northwest.
direction? Northwest?
Northwest. When you're standing at, if you go down here to Furnace Avenue, just a block or so down the road, and you stop, pull in Furnace Avenue and stop, look ahead of you over the dam, you'll see Indian High Point. That's this mountain right here. And Winbeam is obscured in that view to your right, but that's the entry point to this little valley that's going west to northwest, around the lake, across the Old Iron Bridge, and up into Stonetown. Today, you cross over here on what we call the Westbrook Viaduct, come around Snake Dead Man's Corner right there, and onto Stonetown Road and Westbrook Road and up there. Right, give you a perspective? Good, good. Okay, this is a 1922 geological survey map. It shows Tice's Pond up here, which is today Erskine Lakes. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later. There's the Tice home. These are the board homes. Down here is that little flat land. Notice this is a topographical map. Now each one of those little circular or outlining red lines is a change in elevation. Okay? And you can see that the elevation remains here very stable. That's the Westbrook Valley. That is Snake Den. And this is the bridge, the Old Iron Bridge, and right here is the Stonetown Bridge. And notice what's here. That's a lake. See how a lake is shown on the map? This is not a lake. This is bogs. What happened to the lake? The dam went out during the flood in the late 1860s, and that was the last time that area really was productive as a manufacturing area. But at this point, the lake is drained. This is the Hook Road. Comes in off of the Wanaque Dam, just where the dam is today, goes up along the side of the raceway and now ends, but it used to go all the way around and come back out there on what we call Furnace Avenue today. Now, one of the hardest things to do is to find a photograph of Minnie. If any of you have a photograph of Minnie, let me know. I've several family members looking. Very hard to find. This is the best I could do from her obituary. She died February 5th, 1970. I told somebody 74, it was 1970. She grew up in the Westbrook area on the farms during the summers, but her family had taken her to Bloomfield, where they lived. And she never mentions them, but she talks in the book about how she was very unhappy about being taken to the city. And I think that's probably why she doesn't mention her folks. But at any rate, she wrote 13 of those chapters in her cabin along Snake Den Road, which she called Winbeam Lodge, and then the last one, when the Great Lake, which she refers to, was completed. At the time of her death, however, she was living in a trailer park along the Passaic River in the Twin Bridges area, or Meads Basin section. And she had a box full of Winbeams stored in her home that had never been sold. Amazing, amazing. She and I were third cousins. And I'll tell you a little story. Just this is Mrs. Mitnick here? Not yet. Okay. There's a Helen Mitnick whose son Alan works with me at the county college. I met him just because people were talking about my interest in Winbeam, and she was fascinated by it. These people were fascinated about it. And they mentioned Alan, and Alan said, "Well, my mother was a monk." And the next thing you know, we get together, and they share information with me. Fantastic meeting. I was thrilled. When we were finished with the meeting, as I went through this presentation with them, we both noticed that we met on February 2nd, year 2000, which was Minnie's birthday. What are the chances of that? Spooky, isn't it? Talk about spooky. After being through this material so many times, studying it myself, I swear, it's almost like you could turn around on the trails and see her behind you. I mean, she had such a presence and a love for that area. It's unbelievable. But that's Minnie. You can't see it too well, but boy, she's a dead ringer for my Aunt Lily. Not that any of you are particularly interested, probably, but this is a relationship chart that shows that Minnie and I are third cousins, twice removed, and it's through the Buckby line that we have that relationship. Her parents were Peter Speaker and Mary Ann Pellington. Her grandparents were Peter Speaker Monks, that is, and Mary Ann Pellington. Her parents were Catherine Speaker and George W. Monks. The Speaker connection is through Peter Speaker and Ruth Buckby to Ezekiel Buckby, and that's the common ancestor between us, makes us third cousins once removed. These relationship finder charts are great stuff. If any of you are interested, let me know. I'll get you a copy of the blank chart. A little bit more about Minnie's ancestry. As she talks about her grandparents, the grandparents are these four people: George W. Monks, George William Monks, Catherine Speaker, Silas Allen Pellington, and Mary Ann Waymer. The names of these Dutch families just mix all through each line. Allen comes from Captain John Allen, one of the earliest settlers of the area, sea captain, also connected with the Terrys. Pellingtons came from England. William Pellington was the first to arrive from England, and his wife was Mary Van Orden. We don't know if they were married here or in England, but the Pellington line goes back quite a ways. You'll see more on the next slide. Here is Mary Allen. Now notice that there's Allen in here and Allen in there. Same families. Very, very interesting genealogy. I will first show you a little bit more about the Monk side. So this chart I just took down is the families who were settled in Wanaque. Now its name, here's Catherine Speaker, there's the Ruth Buckby line I told you about. And you can trace the Buckbys all the way back to John Buckby and Richard Buckby. Richard came from England and John was a child at the time. Very old family lines. Notice the Vales. This is the Vales from Speedwell in Morris County, the ironworks there. And notice the Holmes family goes back to England. Very long line. But that is nothing compared to the Pellington line, which has in it a connection to the Belcher genealogy, which includes the first governor of the state of New Jersey and goes all the way back to Andrew Belcher in the early 1600s. Very long line. Down to Caroline Belcher, who married William Pellington, down to Silas Allen Pellington and Mary Allen Pellington, Minnie's mother. So if you want more details on this, all this information came out of the Belcher genealogy and some research I did myself on the Monk side. And I have details, birth dates, children, siblings, that kind of stuff. In her book, anything along that line, wildlife, locations that she met. I grew up most of my childhood, you need ore, you need flux or limestone, which we had, you need wood to fuel the furnace, and you need transportation routes to the markets. And what was killing the industry here in New Jersey was the wood had been depleted by 1855. There were no hardwoods of any significant size left. So wood had to be shipped in, very expensive. The limestone in New Jersey had been exhausted in the western portion of the state, so that was coming in from Pennsylvania, very expensive. And hauling stuff to the market was rough. Roads were not that well advanced yet. So trying to crack that nut or solve that problem, they got interested in the Morris Canal. They were charter members of the canal company. Interesting thing is that the father had already died by this time, but Peter's grandfather, in his will, stipulated that he could take, this grandson, Peter, could take all the ore from the Ringwood Company that he wanted to be processed here at this furnace and at the Pumpkin furnace, with a stipulation that he had to provide to his brother, Martin John Ryerson, over in Bloomingdale, the pig iron for his forge. Martin Ryerson had bought this forge, and the old furnace lot in Bloomingdale, the furnace was long gone, and Martin's solution to the transportation problem was to get heavily involved in the first railway line to run through that section. Yes?
The building on the right still stands today.
Yes, in fact, this past winter, I took a walk down and looked at the building, and the windows were open and broken. The door stood wide open.
Where would that be in Bloomingdale now?
If you go down Union Avenue, turn right onto Hamburg Turnpike. Methodist Church is on your left. Park in the shopping center right there called, I think, Bloomingdale Square. I'm not sure, but it's the one right next to the church. And walk around behind the building.
Okay, back of Lena's.
It's north of Lena's, south of Bloomingdale Square, and it sits right there. And all that's left of it is this corner right here. And like I say, this winter when I went by, it was being vandalized. And we made some inquiries and spoke to a few people. And when I was there last week, I noticed now it has all been all boarded up. You can't see in it all. The doors are locked. It's just going to sit there. But what a fantastic spot. It's historically significant. This is a photograph, one of the Vernon Royal collection. This one here, by the way, was loaned to me by Roger Crum from Bloomingdale. This one, however, this is the original that was used in Jim Ransom's book, Vanishing Hours of the Rampoes, and that shows trip hammers. And these trip hammers are powered by water wheels. One wheel for each trip hammer, one trip hammer for each forge or fire at the forge. And that statistic's going to become important in a moment. So I show you these two things just to bring up the transportation issues and how the Ryerson family was trying to solve that. It was leading to the downfall of the iron industry here in this area. Abram Ryerson had already restored the water wheels at Long Pond but never used them because after he had restored them he just decided financially he couldn't let go of them. For all the reasons we've talked about so far, transportation, lack of wood, lack of flux, and so forth. Now, we went into the old road past the furnace. Okay, this photograph is a very early Vernon Royal photograph that shows what that area looked like along Water Street. Water Street is, when you went Furnace Avenue, Water Street ran north along the mountain range, and the Hook Road ran across the bridge by the dam and up around the southern end of the valley. Last week when I did this presentation, I mentioned the fact that there were 6 trip hammers, and somebody raised their hand and said, that's an awful lot of trip hammers. And my records show there were 6, so I went back and I dug through the Wanaque Reservoir Properties records, and I found out for a fact that there were 6 trip hammers there, and that in fact 6 trip hammers is not that unusual, because at the Stirling furnace, one of the a French nobleman was passing through the area during the Revolutionary War period, previous to the Revolutionary War period, and wrote a paper published in 1810 in France where he documents 6 trip hammers in operation at Stirling. Okay? Another reference to the same area, a newspaper article where they were selling the Stirling furnace property, says that there are 6 fires there for the production of pig iron. 6 fires, 6 trip hammers, 6 water wheels. It's not that unusual. But this is unusual because at this particular site there was the furnace, there were 3 grist mills, one country mill, which is where you would take your own grains, have them ground and returned to you. That's a country mill. It's a lower volume mill. There are also 2 exchange mills, which is where you'd bring large quantities of grains, drop them off, and take bagged grains with you. It's an exchange mill. There were 2 of those, larger mills. Those required much more water power. So you've got water wheels to 2 mills, water generators in the mills. You have a sawmill, which ran a Mully saw. You have the forge with 6 trip hammers. We're talking a lot of water power. And what's interesting is with the raceway that they had, 6 feet by 10 feet, leading to that area, the water was overflowing on the tail race, creating a mud pond. There was so much water they couldn't even use it all. A very interesting little spot. Not too many like that. And this is the dam, by the way, right across here that went out in the late 1800s. George Hyler, whose name appears in Minnie's book, was the last one to operate the grist mill there after the dam had gone out and continued to work the mill. The sawmill was converted to a different type of saw and was run by the Stevens family at the end of Stevens Lane, or Stevens Avenue, right there, 1 street above Furnace Ave. Now, if you turn left from that scene we just saw and you went south, you'd come to the old swimming hole, which was featured in the films Perils of Pauline, 1914, a silent movie. And somebody here this morning, Margaret, told me that her family had a copy of the original film. That is now available through that website if you're interested in seeing them.
I have a picture of my mother and the horse that she knew on a postcard.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So if you're interested in that film, it's available. It's $25. From some sources it's backward, but from the website you can get it. And it shows a number of areas around northern New Jersey, including scenes along the Wanaque River. So in the interim, between the time of that last photograph I showed you, 1860s, to the 1914 period, that whole area had fallen back into a rural scene, and is what you hear Minnie describing in her first chapter of her book. If you turn right along Water Street and you read her book, she'll mention the Little Red Cottage. The Little Red Cottage was the home of my great-great-grandfather, John Townsend, who's seen here. This is my grandfather. Estimating he'd be about 10 years old at the time. I have the dates. That picture would have been taken somewhere around 1897, and that is the Little Red House. Now, Elizabeth Folsom's family, the Slope side, lived. Elizabeth? Isabel. Elizabeth was your mother.
Yes.
The Slope side lived in that house before the Townsends did, which was an interesting little piece of news I found recently. This is Anna Eliza Willis and John Townsend and their family on the old Water Street. And I don't know why they did it, but they've obviously posed for this picture, and they brought their buckets and pails and bottles and stuff out. Have no idea why they were so proud of those.
They were all thirsty.
This could have been a little shine here, I suspect, and some, buttermilk and skim milk, and I don't think so. So she talks about that area. She says this narrow winding home road that leads to the old home scenes, the road that only mentioned brings 100 happy dreams. I can just imagine what that must have been like for her. And this quiet little secluded village, valley, a world all of its own. That's where she ends chapter 1. Chapter 2 is called Free and shows a scene of the Wanaque River above the Hook Road Bridge. It's a short chapter in which she kind of writes seasonally. She writes a spring chapter, a summer chapter, a winter chapter, a fall chapter. And here she describes every tree, every shrub, every wildflower, every bird, every berry. I mean, you name it, she mentions it. Paints the picture of the natural scene. For botanists, it's a great resource. What was in this valley at that time? Just absolutely amazing.
Where's that little red house?
The Little Red House, when you go in Furnace Avenue, past where the dam is today, Furnace on your left, you make a right-hand turn on Water Street, go up about a quarter of a mile as you're approaching Cooper Swamp, sit right there. Above, from what I can tell from her other writings, Indian Council Rock, which some people say didn't exist, but from her writings it appears that it did. So this is the chapter called Free, chapter 2, and I went out and took pictures of every one of the flowers that she mentioned. This is cardinal flower, this is Indian pipe, this is poke in full berry stage. At this point the berries are poisonous, but my great-grandfather, my grandfather, we all love poke. My daddy has it on his property. We pick it and we eat it every season. It's delicious. Just don't eat it when the berries are formed. Kill you quick. The poke berry was used for ink and dyes by the Wanaque Indians. And you get that stuff on your hands, you'll know it as well.
What's that called?
Poke, P-O-K-E. And this is bittersweet on the burned ruins of the Long Pond Ironworks. Bittersweet is an orange and yellowish colored blossom, reddish orange, brick red, maybe an orange, melon color. And it's named bittersweet, which in the language of flowers means truth. I kind of like that notion. So I went out and took a lot of these photographs myself, and I'm trying to annotate her work with pictures of the things as she mentions them. There's probably 100 or more of those that I've taken. This is the Lover's Bridge, or the Old Iron Bridge she talks about. The last time this bridge was seen, to my knowledge, it was in 1974, when the water level was so low that there was only 25 days of water left in the Wanaque River, and the top of the bridge could be seen. It still sits there. And In this chapter, she starts talking about the families who are in the area. And she mentions Pleasant sitting on the old plank bridge, swinging my feet over the waters, you know. Imagine what that must have been like. Her days as a child, 1885, are described in these six, or when she was 6 years old. This is the chapters I was telling you about that she describes her childhood years. And she mentions her grandparents a lot in here. And places like Wildcat Brook and Burnt Meadow, the old mine lot. I wanted to find out where each one of these things were. I'd love to see the top of this bridge. This is a postcard of the bridge. That came to me courtesy of the fellows who run El Palazzo's. And it was near the intersection of Water Street and Indian Council Rock. This is looking east across the bridge to Water Street, which shows a T intersection back in here. Wouldn't I love to know who those people were? The next chapter is Grandmother's Herbs. I have a friend who sells teas and herbs, and he was fascinated with this chapter. It covers just about every type of plant that we had that could be used as an herb or as a remedy, an Indian remedy for different ailments. Quite a bit of detail. There's a poem that starts this chapter, and it's about 40 lines, and very descriptive. Great piece of work. This is supposed to be Edward R. Hewitt standing in the boat. I haven't been able to confirm that, but that's what we're told. Catching a fish, you can see it on the end of his line. This is the next chapter, Queer Old Codger. Not exactly politically correct, but nevertheless, that's what she called it. And here you start to learn a little bit more about the customs of the people of that area, what they ate, what kind of utensils they used, ironwood and hickory posts for their gardens. They all kept bees. They had rabbit pot pie and eel and roasted woodchuck. I mean, when you listen to the meals that this guy cooked for her, it's incredible. Yes.
You don't know who this old Bill was?
Nobody seems to know who old Bill was.
He was cool.
Yeah, yeah. Today we'd arrest him, but in those days he was cool. Okay, she doesn't mention her own family by name, and she doesn't mention the relationships between other people that she writes about in herself, and she's completely vague as to who old Bill was. I'd like to know. I suspect he may have been one of the Cisco gentlemen that lived up on the other end of Snake Bend Road. Somewhat of a hermit type. But I haven't been able to prove that. I'd like to do some more research on that. Again, another Vernon Royal print of the Miller's Falls. And here she talks about her grandfather, Pellington, who had a barn raising, and all the neighbors came and looked at the names. Henry Fredericks, Anthony Riesmith, George Stevens, Smith Patterson, John Ricker. You can go down the list. Okay? Yes?
Her grandfather was George Stevens.
Well, very good. How about that? Your grandfather and my grandfather were great friends.
Colfax. My great uncle was Ralph Colfax.
Ralph Colfax is a fourth cousin to my aunt on the Townsend side.
I know Skylar's, I know.
There you go.
I love this stuff.
You can't help but love this stuff.
I'd like to live back when they grew up.
Wouldn't you?
So we were-
Wouldn't you? Wow. Anyway, I just got the biggest kick out here. John Carr. Okay, they were related to the Colfaxes, and that John Carr married his grandson married my aunt. I think his grandson, right?
Yeah.
Not sure exactly how that worked, but at any rate, raising the barn and the old oak pins that they would all be ready to go in place, and the meals that were cooked for them when they were finished. A description of the dumplings and everything else that her grandmother made. Great little piece of work. And Mrs. C over here, I put that in parentheses. That's Kerrigan, and the city she's talking about is Bloomfield. Okay. Her family in Bloomfield, that's mom and dad living back in the city. And Mrs. C, by the way, is Mrs. Kerrigan, whose home was on the upper end of Snake Den Road at just past the White Ecology Center. That's the Winfield Kerrigan farm, and it is where a very famous Lady Longfellow the 8th, 5, 6, 7, 8, yes, 8th, was raised and a racehorse of some acclaim, apparently, in the metropolitan area. This photograph is around 1910, and that
called the Winfield Place?
the Winfield Kerrigan farm.
My
where the
aunt was the
Winfield
last
Place.
one to live there.
Really, your aunt's name was
Edith.
Edith Haywood,
Mary Con Woods.
and she lived there at that house the last time. Last time we
She
were
died
there.
in 1912.
Yeah, the house, as late as 1910, the house was still standing as small dwellings, and then after that it went down. I don't know exactly when, but that's a typical 1800s style house, no question about it. Now this scene is when you come down Snake Den Road. At the bottom of the hill you hit Miller's Falls, and here's a wonderful shot of Miller's Falls. This is a very late Vernon Royal photograph. You're going to see how that area had changed in a few moments as we go through the rest of the presentation. How are we doing time-wise? We're at 1 hour. Keep going or stop?
Cool.
Keep going. Go faster, go slower. Go home. Go to...
As long as we finish a little before 3.
Okay. Next chapter, Lost in the Mountains. Okay, she describes Wolf Den, where the last wolves were killed by the Weaver Boys in the 1930s. Weaver Boys from the Otter Hole section of Montefiore. Okay. Well, that, by the way, is seen slightly down Townsend Road, looking over towards Westbrook, towards the Winbeam Mountains. So, come down Westbrook Road from that West Milford, turn right on Townsend Road, you go up over the knoll, and all those trees and stuff were out of there then. That was a wide open area. You could look across the window. And I don't know who this is standing here, but I played some games with some of these people. We'll see that a little bit later. I wanted to find out where Wolf Den was. Well, in the search for maps of the old area, I came across Minnie's map. In a letter she wrote to the Wanaque Reservoir Commission asking for permission to hike all through the areas. And here is the old road. Here is the loop that I showed you before, the Duffy family, North Swamp. I have a better picture of this that you can look at close up. Every Indian place name, every historic site that she mentions is on there, including Wolf Den and Wildcat Den, places that other people told me really didn't exist. They were just kind of folklore. They existed. In fact, from the map and a few other pieces of information, I found out who owns the property today, and I wanted to go up there and see it. So I got a friend to fly me into the area. You fly into 1,100 feet airport up on top of the mountain into this strip, which in itself is quite a trip. This is the plane leaving after they dropped me off, and my next portion of the ride, I had a choice. Either this breezy or this helicopter. I chose the helicopter. We took off. John Joseph's property, yes. And we took off and flew over the Wanaque Reservoir. There's the Westbrook Viaduct. There's Dead Man's Corner. This is the top of Indian High Point. We buzzed these kids over here. I think they were already buzzed, but we went right by them again. This is the top of the hill on the other side of the valley, one of his neighbors, and we landed the helicopter on their front lawn.
Oh, Eagle Rock, Eagle Nest.
Yes.
So his property is where Wolf Den was?
Yes. In fact, Wolf Den used to sit right here, 90 feet higher than the runway. In fact, the Wolf Den mountain was taken down to build the runway. I was sick. Of course, you know, it's his property, he has every right, but, you know, the landmark is gone. I had a lot of fun flying around there, but I had even more fun when my father finds this photograph of my grandfather standing on top of Wolf Den in 1920. Love that photograph. Wolf Den was just this huge rock outcropping with dens where the wolves used to live. And in her book, The Lyrics of Nature, she writes a poem about Wolf Den Mountain and a young boy who's fatherless and lives with his mother and has to go out and bring the cows back home off the side of the mountain. And he's being circled by wolves. Makes his way back to the cabin door. Great story.
Just where is this, Rich?
This, if you were to go up Westbrook Road and you pass the Stevens place and you hang a right as you go up the mountain and then a left and you start up the hill, you'll see the signs for leaving Wanaque. On the left-hand side is 7-Eleven. Not the 7-Eleven, it's house number 7-Eleven, and that takes you up to the top of the wolf.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
The Stevens place, is that the red farm on the corner of McGee?
No, that is Silas Pellington's place. But the Stevens place was the Silas Ransom's place. Previous to the Ransom's was the Pellington property. And that's on the corner of McGee. If you go up a little bit further, where Van Orden has the sand pit,
Right.
now Bram,
Right.
that was the Maple Grove Farm. That was Abram Stevens' place. side of the road. It's a very charming house that sits against the bank. That was Stephen's property also. So I was kind of fascinated by that picture. Finally found where Wolf Den was and found my family standing on the top of it. Great stuff. Now, the day everything went wrong is an interesting chapter. She talks about bullfrogs, yellow jackets, copperhead snakes, and all the things you pass along the way as you walk the trails up there. And these are, this is Uncle Dave with his Jersey oxen. She was very taken by her Uncle Dave. And the more I study him, the more I can see why. Dave Miller is referred to as Old Uncle Dave. He died at 91 years old. Minnie died at 91 years old. So she'd be old Minnie? I'm not sure which. What goes around comes around.
Old Aunt Minnie.
Old Minnie May. So this is David Miller. Let's check out this guy. This is from his obituary. A large newspaper photograph of him in his obituary. Okay? And he talks about his lookouts beside his home. Now, I was fascinated as to where his home might have been. Even the flood can't dislodge him. He just moved to a different section of the property, and he fought the Wanaque Company, or the Wanaque Reservoir, North Jersey District Water Commission, with a vengeance. Became rather wealthy, relatively speaking, when he sold his properties. Others weren't so fortunate. But David Miller's an interesting guy. Here is a very early Vernon Royal photograph of David Miller's home above the falls. And there's Vernon. This is David Miller, I would say, somewhere around 50 to 60 years old. Died when he was 91. This is believed to be the second home on the Miller homestead. This set above the falls, and the view out the window was spectacular. This is the view taken some 30 years later, again by Vernon Royal. You can see the difference in the vintage of the photograph. This is the view out of the kitchen window. Here's another shot of David's home. This is, again, the second home that's set on the property. And like I told you, the camera at that time focused in on a very narrow area, and everything to the right and left tended to get blurry. Can't see very much of that. Why Vernon Royal kept these? I have to believe that he had a real strong interest in David personally. I don't know why, but you can guess a few things as we look at these pictures. He was quite a character, very interesting man. Even in his late 80s, he was still providing information about the Ryerson works, where he had worked as a superintendent for a period of time.
Rich, my Uncle Ed, when he was little, was up there,
At that house?
Yeah, and he was walking, tells me, with Mr. Miller, and he was going all over, and I happen to think when he had a scene out like that, the first one, Uncle Ed said he was going like that, and I own all this land and all this land, and Uncle Ed looked up once and he thought his eyes was closed. How can you own all that land?
Well, I'll tell you, it's interesting. There were 14 Dutch families, including Posts, Van Wagners, Van Winkels, Westervelts, Vreelands, that purchased 11,000 acres from the end of North above the Safe Falls. By 1710, that property had been divided up into 14 chunks, and then 14 more chunks, and then 14 more chunks, and was all sold off. And by 1714, they were already settled in the Wanaque area, having just moved up the Wanaque River. So these families, they bought large tracts of land, yes.
I'm sorry again, but that roadway, is that one of the?
That roadway's gone.
Okay.
This road, now, do you remember a moment ago I showed you a scene of the the Miller's Falls, and I said you'll see another one in a minute? And the lower end of the falls was all brush and overgrown. That's where this sat. This is the original Miller homestead, from the nearest I can tell from looking at the deeds. Okay, that's the original. That's set below the house we just saw previously, down over that knoll. I said you look out the view, they would have looked right past that house towards the Stonetown Bridge. And this road was moved twice. At the time of this photograph, which is very early, it was right along the falls. And that's the original home, and if you look back into the old deeds of the Passaic County deeds, you can find many descriptions of the property. Very, very nice piece of land. Look at this little buggy, isn't that great? That's, again, a very early photograph. The earlier photographs are mounted on different boards. Now, at the time I took the photographs and reproduced them, I was kind of fascinated with this little guy sitting right here. Looking at the beard and the ears and the pointed nose, I said, that's probably David Miller. But at the North Jersey Highlands Historical Society, someone said, no, that's Vernon Royal himself, who was known to have put himself in photographs and taken the photographs before. So now, is that David Miller or is that Vernon Royal? And the debate begins. My feeling is if I can't fix one of these problems in my presentation, I feature it. So, here's a picture purported to be Vernon Royal. And there's David Miller. This is Vernon Royal, a self-portrait taken in 1870. Could that be Vernon Royal in 1910? Could this be David Miller, and here again in 1930? Someone says it's Abram Hewitt. Oh my God, it's getting worse. Well, the fact of the matter is, this is supposed to be Vernon Royal, but when you turn the picture over on the back, there's a Vernon Royal, question mark. So we don't know who that is. But personally, I'm inclined to think it's David Miller. Because I brought the thing up even larger, and look at the schnoz here, and here. I don't think this is that man. But I could be completely wrong. Who knows? If you know, tell me. So, the best exploration says, it's an interesting little guy sitting along the road. And here is the next chapter, chapter 9. She passes the George Stevens farm up Westbrook Road to the upper bridge that crosses the Snake Den Road. That's way at the top of the mountain, going up towards West Milford, Moncapin, then called Upper Moncapin. And she passes through Albert Rice's property called Old Camp Wanaque.
Mr. Townsend?
Yes.
I have a painting of this shot that my great uncle did in like 1920 something or other.
Love to see that.
Yeah, I have it home. I meant to bring it tonight, but I didn't.
Love to see
catch
that.
it where I left.
Yes. Well, we're going to have to stay in touch. This is Albert Rhinesmith. These are charcoal portraits that were in the family, lost for a couple decades, thought to have been disposed of, and recently found in my father's attic. And so I reproduced them. Okay.
I wasn't too proud of Albert.
Albert looks like a Dutchman,
I
doesn't
don't
he?
like his hairdo.
Ah, well. Oh, well. This is Mariah Vreeland, a descendant of the Vreelands that I talked to you about before. She is the 7th generation of the Vreelands in Passaic County, descendant from the ones who had purchased the Aquaconock patent. And Albert is the 4th generation in this country, a descendant from the iron workers at Long Pond and Hope. Long Pond. Yeah, Long Pond. Ringwood and Hope. And this is resting on the old church steps, and in this chapter she starts talking about Burnt Meadow Road and McGee Road and the old Baptist church that used to be over there. I went over there, looked at the property. You can see the few of the mounds from the old graves and a few field stones, head and foot, but no marked stones. And that church is gone, and of course the Stonetown Methodist Church is gone.
I was wondering with the Westbrook Baptist, because a lot of the Stevenses were buried there.
Well, there was the Miller Cemetery along Townsend Road, and then there was the small cemetery next to the Westbrook Baptist Church.
Yeah.
But we have no records for those. Can't find any records.
Yeah, was it there?
Yeah.
I had a ride maybe 8 years ago with Ralph Colback. They did have a list of who was in there. My great-grandmother.
Is it Westbrook Baptist?
Yes.
Ooh. Ralph's holding out on me.
But he didn't know exactly where it was that day.
Yeah, well, I was able to find the cemetery. That wasn't too bad. It's on the corner of McGee Road and Burnt Meadow Road.
Yeah, because my grandmother's mother's buried there too.
Yeah, it's an I wanted to explore that spot. Now this is the Sawmill Road. The way it's written on the back of the photograph says Sawmill Road. I can't find Sawmill Road anywhere on a map. I do know that the Burnt Meadow Brook empties into Sawmill Brook over by McGee Road, and but I haven't really been able to find that road. Just thought it was an interesting old Vernon Royal print. Chapter 11 is the Gypsy Days, and she talks about, again, all the old name places. Winfield Farm, Nature's Friend Camp, Wanaque High Point, all of these. Wickedoma, which in the Indian language means a place from which one cries. Interesting sentiment. I've been up to the top of Wickedoma. My great-grandfather, George Henry Rhinesmith, used to own the property, and it is really an interesting outcropping. You can't stand up there without having a very different sense of the area.
Excuse me, do you know where that picture was taken?
This one here? No.
Yeah.
No idea.
Because my aunt says she thinks that picture is, if you can see the building in the far,
Yes, there is a building in the background.
she thinks that was my great grandfather's farm. She's
So
not
we're gonna have
positive,
to
but
try
she
to
thinks
track
so.
that down. Yeah.
But she hasn't, she saw it when she was a very young child, but she's not positive.
Well, the
she
fence
thinks-
kind of leads you to think that too. The fence is in the
She
front. You
thinks,
can barely see
I
that
have a
there's a fence
picture of
there.
that building, but from another
Different
another
angle.
perspective, yeah.
I saw 2 or 3 different versions of the same scene, and they all, one doesn't show a house in the back, and then 2 did. But this is the one that's out of her book. Now again, when she mentions all these places, I went out to try to find them, and I'll just share with you a few more of the photographs I took. This is called an errata. It's a rock placed on the top of Indian High Point by glacier movement, and then the upheaval of the mountains. And these are very interesting. You'll find them around the area quite a bit. This is the entrance to Rumi Mine, which she mentions. There's that Stonetown Bridge that you'll see when the water's down low. Okay? And this is Winbeam Mountain taken at 5:30 in the morning from the top of Indian High Point. I walked up there at night to get that shot. But I have a number of photographs around the area, and like I say, everything she talks about, you can find it. You can find it. Now she mentions Camp Wanaque and the Rhinesmith home up on Snake Den. This is a family photograph of that house, believed to have been built around 1740. It's been in the family for 5 generations before it was torn down in the late 40s. And this is my Aunt Lily, who I mentioned to you earlier. If you had ever known her when she was in her 90s, as I remember her, she did look like Minnie May Monks. I mean, you look at the 2 photographs, they look so much alike. This is Jane Vreeland. This is Art Rhinesmith, Rita, and this is Elizabeth Room, I believe, right? Elizabeth Room? Family portrait. These are their vines that were always around the yard. My dad remembers sleeping there in the living room area on the floor, and this is the kitchen. You had to go out of the house to get into the kitchen. And that house stayed up there until the 1940s, post-World War I.
Richard, whatever happened to Lily?
Aunt Lily?
Yeah, when I was little, she showed me a lot of old pictures and old-time things.
I have no idea where the stuff went. Aunt Lily died in a nursing home in the 70s, and I saw her just before she died. She was just a little dumpling in a chair in the hall. Sweet little lady, though. A lot of fun. I always had fun visiting with her. This is the getting near the end, chapter 12, one October day, shows the Jersey oxen. Interesting. She talks about areas that are now within the take line, and Bill Trusowitz just a few moments ago gave us a map that shows the take line for the Wanaque Reservoir. Very sad term. They just came over and took it. And John Townsend, who moved out of the Little Red Cottage, moved into the stone house, the old Tice home, suspecting he was going to be safe, and then they took that too. Now she mentions the Rhinesmiths and Charlie B in this chapter. She points out, and this is fall now, she's pointing out off of Winbeam Mountain towards the West Milford section. She mentioned Charlie B's place. Well, there's a photograph of Charlie B, 1920, and Hannah Matilda Hyler, daughter of George Hyler, who ran the mills at the lake. Very, very old family. They like their pineys, apparently. He's quite a looker, ain't he? Rhinesmith clan, I'll tell you. Now, one thing that she doesn't mention anywhere in the book, which is kind of unusual, is the residence of George W. Townsend, and I suspect that he's a relative, because she doesn't talk about relatives. She talks about people who aren't related to her, but she won't talk about her family, and she doesn't talk about this man. And if you research George W. Townsend, you'll find out that he was for a time in the care of George W. Monks. And no one knows who George's wife was. But if you look at her, she looks like Minnie May. And if you notice, he has, in 1880, he has the property surrounding the falls, okay? 100 and some acres on that side and 20 more acres on this side, which comprises all of the property around the waterway. He was in the ironworks. His father had passed away at the Pumpton Ironworks in 1835. He was orphaned and then raised by Millers and Monkses. And this is where his home was. You can't see that very well. But if you look, George W. Townsend, his residence opposite Dr. Colfax's place on the Hamburg Turnpike, and George W. Townsend owning a store up here, which was on the other side of the river, and it's presumed that the lot spanned the river both sides, which was the Morris Canal feeder. So there's a lot of interest in this guy. These photographs were found in a home and given to me by Warren's wife, because I could identify who the family was. I was very, very happy to get those. This is just for kicks. It's another example of the relationship finder, and shows the descent to George W. Townsend and a descent down this side to my great-grandfather, and they were quite distant cousins. But we don't know anything about that side of the family. We're trying to find out more, so if anybody knows anything about those folks, please let me know. Now we're down to chapter 13, where she writes about Winbeam itself and the Boardville area, the Green Swamp, onto Manhattan, the view that could be seen. And she mentions the stone houses that were taken. Houses like the Board home and the Tice home and the Wagner homes, all taken within the valley. She writes in one of her works, in Lyrics of Nature, she writes a poem called Winbeam Peak, which Mabel was kind enough to give me several months ago. And that is, that's one of her poems. That's the whole thing. It just, she writes these little, 10 to 12 stanza poems about all the places that she mentions, Torrey Rocks and Indian High Point and the like. She talks about the stone houses that were taken down. This is one of the earliest homes in the Wanaque Valley, known to be there in 1740 because it's recorded in Cornelius Board's first deed for lot number 1 in Wanaque when he came up to build the ironworks. So the Tice house was already there. This home stayed in our family all the way down to 1922-23 when it was raised as part of the Wanaque Reservoir project. And that's John Townsend again and the rest of the family. Another home that was in the area that was taken was this home, which you've seen many times, I'm sure. That is the Ryerson homestead. A lot of controversy about this place. It's said to have been built by Thunis Ryerson, but if you look at when Thunis Ryerson was born, he couldn't have built the house. It's said to have been built in 1675, and there's some speculation as to whether or not they would have built that, because this type of a gable roof really didn't exist in our American architecture at that time. But no one said that this portion of the house was built then. It was that portion of the house that was most likely built then. And there's controversy as to whether the house stood there even in 1728 when Johannes van Wagner was said to have been born there. But I think I can shed some light on a few of those things for you. Here's this photograph. This is a copy of the original, which my dad has. This is another one that came through the Doty family, who were descendants of the Ryersons. This is the house. This is the portion of the house that I believe was actually built in 1675 when they said it was. A lot of people don't believe that there were people up here in that area, but Abram Ryerson, 5th generation of the Ryerson family, who translated the original Dutch records of the Pumpton Reformed Church, states in his records that with the exception of the Beam family, the first 5 purchasers of the Wanaque patent were probably the first settlers in the area. But he specifically says with the exception of, and that was 1844 thereabouts when he did the actual translation. And I have a copy of the original document, and I'll show you some more facts that make me believe that we did actually have people up here that early. And by the way, the Beams were partners with the Lyons family. They were 1/3 partners in a joint venture with the Lyons families, and family tradition tells us that Anthony Beam's wife was Margaret Lyons, which would make you think that it's a 3 partnership. within the Lyons family, actually, but who wants to quibble? So, mentioning to you about Joris Ryerson, here he is, 1713. Couldn't have built the house in 1675, and not likely that he built it in 1728. And notice also some of these earlier marriages here. Jane Ryerson married Diedrich Tice, third generation in the Wanaque Valley. So they were there quite a ways before this Ryerson family. The other thing that I think is interesting is if you look through the Van Wagner genealogy, you'll find that Johannes Van Wagner owned a piece of property that spans both sides of Ringwood Avenue down by the McKinnon residence, across the street from the Haskell School, spanned both sides of the road, was 1,600 acres, or virtually the same size as Central Park in New York City, had 2 river bottoms, and was split later between the family, and carried on until my great-grandfather Cornelius Townsend married was the son of Sophronia Van Wagner and Charles Townsend, still residing in the same place. So, checking up here, 1682, we know that Peter Marcellus conveyed property to his son-in-law upon his marriage in Preakness. We know that the Van Wagners were there, and that in 1728, Johannes Van Wagner, buried in the Ryerson Cemetery, on the farm, was born on the farm at Wanaque, okay, which was at that time Van Wagner property. If you check the maps, you'll see that that's very easily proven. And talking about those 14 Dutch families, Katrina Van Wagner, one of the descendants, married Adrian Post, one of the patentees also. You'll find that Elche Van Wagner married Wander Diedrichs, son of Hans Diedrichs. Hans Diedrichs was one of the patentees. Looking up here, you'll see Hermanus Van Wagner married Annetje Walling Jacobs, or Van Winkle, as the name is known today, daughter of Walling Jacobs Van Winkle, one of the patentees. These families, these 14 Dutch families, they kept the property within the families, and they purchased additional lands coming all the way up the Wanaque and Passaic rivers as far as Horseneck and as far as Ringwood. So if you compare these old lines, you'll find out that much of this stuff that's called lore is actually true. In the last section called Winbeam, or in this chapter, she gives a little Dutch poem. I love that poem. I mean, that's so neat. And it's translated. It's talking about the pigs playing and splashing in the water, and Derek being a very good little boy, a very lovely child. Hmm?
I said I couldn't even pronounce the names.
Yeah, it takes a little time.
Yeah.
Takes a little time. And now we're coming down to the end, and I put this photograph of on the road to Greenwood Lake. I have no idea where that was, but we're moving away from the Westbrook Valley on up towards Ringwood, and we pass one of the last stone houses. She mentions the last Vernon Royal photograph in the book, which was the home of Captain Joseph Board, and she mentions how great an expanse, all the way from Squire Brown's place up in Erskine, down past the Board's home, and right on around to the lower end of Wolf Den and Green Swamp, the lower ends of the Wanaque Reservoir. She describes all that area that is about to be taken. And by the way, this right here is the old railroad crossing through the Wanaque Valley. That had to be moved when they built the reservoir. And today, across this expanse right here, right along this tree line, is where the Monksville Dam stands today. This picture is taken just about from the end of Skyline Drive, looking out towards the Monksville area. And this is Joseph Board's home, and one door down was Philip Tice's house, the one I referred to earlier. And with that, we've covered everything in the book, all the chapters, and just about everything I have that I can tell you relative to the slides. So if you have some questions or anything you want to ask, please feel free. You're welcome to come up and take a look at these slides a little closer when we put the lights up. Yes?
Along the Monksville Dam, when you come up from this way to head towards Westbrook, there's that graveyard on the left side.
cemetery.
Cemetery.
That cemetery was moved, several of the cemeteries were moved when the Wanaque Reservoir was built. Some of them were moved to Pumpkin by the Pumpkin Reformed Church.
So that's a moved one, it's not?
That is a moved one.
Oh, okay.
That was moved a very short distance. It's surprising how short a distance that actually had to be moved in order to make its place. It was relocated by the Water Commission and has recently been vandalized and sold.
Oh, that's sad.
Yes, one of the metal monk's stones that was standing there, I have a photograph of it, now appears to be toppled, but that's a neat spot, yes.
Does the commission give you access to that graveyard?
If you have family in the cemetery, you can get
Do
access.
you have to prove that you're
go with
I'm ready.
She could go with me.
Yeah, I got in, and I didn't have a real hard time getting in.
Does that mean
It took 4 visits to the guardhouse and 2 registered letters, and I got in.
If you sign up for a fishing pass, you get a fishing pass, and they're rentable, I mean, they're easy to get. Then you can go down Broadway, and all the way down near the end, you can see the cemetery.
Yeah,
So you just pretend you're not
I got a collapsible fishing rod and reel, put it in the back of my backpack on my motorcycle, and went down to the Monksville Cemetery and fished. And happened to be looking at the stones while I was there. There's a way to skin the cat.
Oh,
Yes.
were you able to, or did you,
I wonder
when
who he
we
takes
had
on
the
for
drought and it was so low, were you able to get down there and visit some of those
No.
ruins?
No, I asked for permission to go in and walk around when the water was low. I couldn't get permission to do it. I took a bus to the Cupsall Lake bus stop and walked back to walked along the fence and took photographs as I walked, and I was stopped twice by guards, asked what I was doing, how I got there, where I was coming from, why I was taking pictures.
You're a historian. I mean, what do they think?
I looked like a bum, transient, no physical means of transportation, I was just waiting to see how far it was going to go, but no, I couldn't get permission. But I did have a problem when the cemeteries were moved out of the Wanaque Reservoir. The members of the family were contacted and were told that they were going to be moved. There was compensation necessary that was made, and the families were assured that their cemetery plots would be taken care of in their final destinations, many of which are in Midvale. And a few years ago, one of our ancestors' stones, Margaret Lyne's stone, was toppled. It was still in one piece, and I went down and it took me, like I say, several visits and several letters, and finally a registered letter, and then I got the stone put back up, and the following winter it was down again. And I notified them, and 3 months went by, and in the interim somebody drove over the stone and broke it. And I got them to put the stone back up, and they fixed the stone. They had a choice: you can fix it or you can replace it. You can fix it to my satisfaction, or you can replace it. And they fixed it to my satisfaction, genuinely to my satisfaction. The stone is now back up, but it really is a hassle. First of all, you have to let them know that they own that spot. You have to let them know that that they are responsible for that spot. And you have to let them know that you're going to take it as far as you have to take it.
Just don't give up.
Right.
Yes, I know. It's a shame that you have to do this. I know. I have the same problems,
Yeah. Yes.
Did she marry or have any children?
No, never married, and has no children that we know of. No, I don't think,
I don't think any of them had any children, Rich, because
the generation has passed, and there
My
are,
sister didn't have any that I knew.
the Pearsall.
Helen Pearsall,
Yes.
I visited her several times.
Right.
She's how I got the books,
Right. There are no descendants that I can find. I've read through the wills. And,
Brothers or sisters?
She had brothers and sisters. I don't know
She had
that.
no brothers, just 2 sisters that I knew of.
Yeah,
Adelpha
I have the
and,
family.
Helen.
I have the family group, but it's not fresh in my mind. But there were, go back a generation, that was a large family. And there are a lot of offshoots. And I believe that the photographs that I got came from a monk's descendant who lived on Starlight Avenue in Bloomingdale. I grew up with the book. I never realized it then.
Well, what I regret, when I went to visit her, she was in a Westmont nursing home in Tollway, and before my husband passed away, I went to visit her several times up until the time she died, and she brought all her personal belongings. She probably had paintings there, because when I
Oh, I
told
mentioned
her,
that, yes.
my husband was the one that was related to her, and we had conversation with her, and she was so thrilled that we were a descendant of hers to give me she gave me the 3 books. And if I had only looked around, I love art, but I never looked at the walls. they probably threw that stuff away because they moved up to Wayne now, and that stuff was just thrown to the garbage probably. If I could, I would love to have had one of her paintings.
Well,
If you ever find anything, let me know
yes,
about the painting.
it's interesting, like I mentioned to you before, we